There's a feeling we all know, a shiver that runs down your spine when you sense someone watching you, an uneasy glance into the night sky, wondering if those stars are all that's out there, or if something is staring back. Tonight, we're diving into the deepest shadows of the unknown, where ordinary people stumbled into extraordinary encounters that defy explanation, logic, and sometimes even sanity. From eerie lights that stalk the lonely woods, to metallic monsters lurking in small-town skies, from voices that vanish into the ether, to those who return from the void with tales too terrifying to believe. These stories are not from science fiction movies. They're real, documented, and chilling accounts of humanity's strangest and most mysterious brushes with the alien unknown. So, lock your doors, dim the lights, and listen closely. Because if these stories are true, then the question isn't whether we're alone in the universe. The question is, what happens when they find you? The lights over Phoenix. It started as just another calm night in the desert. The date was March 13, 1997, and the city of Phoenix, Arizona, was settling in for an evening like any other. The stars above were vivid, scattered across the inky sky like diamonds on black velvet. But at 8:15 p.m., something happened that changed everything. The first call came from Henderson, Nevada. A man reported seeing a massive V-shaped formation of lights slowly gliding across the sky. He said it was enormous, stretching hundreds of feet across, and it moved with an eerie silence. The lights weren't blinking like an airplane's, nor did they resemble anything he'd ever seen before. It just floated, he told authorities, his voice trembling. Minutes later, more calls flooded in as the object made its way southward, passing over entire neighborhoods and leaving a trail of stunned witnesses in its wake. The craft finally reached Phoenix at around 9:30 p.m. Thousands of residents stepped out onto their porches or pulled over their cars to look at the strange lights hovering above them. Some described feeling a profound sense of awe, while others felt an almost primal fear, as though something ancient and unknowable had descended upon the city. Witnesses claimed the craft blotted out the stars as it passed overhead. It was utterly silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. People tried to take photos and videos, but their equipment failed to capture the sheer scale of what they were seeing. Whatever it was, it defied explanation. For weeks afterward, the city buzzed with theories. The military insisted it was a series of flares dropped during a training exercise, but locals knew better. Flares don't hover in perfect formation. Flares don't stretch across the horizon like an impossibly large shadow. And flares certainly don't make you feel like you're being watched. Even now, the Phoenix lights remain one of the most widely witnessed and unexplained UFO sightings in history. What was it? A secret military project? A visiting spacecraft? Or something else entirely? The truth, like the craft, remains just out of reach. The abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. The Hills weren't looking for trouble. It was September 19, 1961, and the couple was driving home from a short vacation in Canada. The roads of New Hampshire were deserted that night, winding through endless stretches of dense forest. The only sound was the hum of their car's engine and the soft chatter of the radio. But then, they saw it. At first it looked like a bright star, but it was moving, erratically, almost playfully. Barney pulled over to get a better look, and as the object came closer, he realized it wasn't a star at all. It was a craft, disc-shaped with rows of windows lining its rim. Through binoculars, Barney swore he saw figures inside, tall humanoid shapes watching him. Panic set in. The couple jumped back into their car and sped off, but the craft followed, hovering above them like a predator stalking its prey. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. Or so they thought. When Betty and Barney arrived home hours later, something was wrong. Their clothes were torn, Barney's shoes were scuffed, and Betty's dress was ripped at the hem. They couldn't remember what had happened during the last stretch of their drive, but they felt violated. Over the next few weeks, Betty began having vivid nightmares about being taken aboard a spacecraft. She described cold metallic rooms and strange beings with large almond-shaped eyes. Under hypnosis, Barney recounted similar memories of being paralyzed on a table, of instruments probing his body, and of a voice in his head saying, "You will not be harmed." Skeptics called it a hoax, but the Hills had no reason to lie. They were an ordinary middle-class couple, hardly the type to seek fame, and their accounts, though chilling, were consistent and detailed. What happened to Betty and Barney that night? The answers lie in the gaps of their memory, in the hours they can't explain. But one thing is certain: they were never the same again. The Dyatlov Pass incident. The year was 1959, and 9 young hikers embarked on what should have been the adventure of a lifetime. They were experienced mountaineers, eager to conquer the frozen wilderness of Russia's Ural Mountains. But what began as a challenge soon turned into a mystery that has haunted the world for decades. When the search party finally found their campsite, the scene was like something out of a nightmare. Their tent had been slashed open from the inside, as if they had fled in terror. The hikers' bodies were scattered across the snow, some wearing only their underwear despite the sub-zero temperatures. Their injuries were bizarre: fractured skulls, broken ribs, and in one case a missing tongue. Yet, there were no external wounds to explain such trauma. It was as if they had been crushed by an immense force. Adding to the mystery, strange orange orbs had been seen in the sky on the night of the incident. The locals spoke of curses, of the mountains being a forbidden place. The official report offered little comfort, attributing the deaths to an unknown compelling force. But what kind of force could drive seasoned hikers to their deaths in such a horrifying way? To this day, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains unsolved. Was it an avalanche? A secret military test? Or did something far more sinister descend upon the group that night? The frozen winds of the Ural Mountains still carry whispers of what happened, but the truth is as elusive as the shadows in the snow. The Rendlesham Forest Incident. It was just after Christmas in 1980 when strange lights began flickering in the dense woods near RAF Bentwaters, a U.S. Air Force base in Suffolk, England. The first soldiers to investigate thought it might be a downed aircraft, but what they found was beyond anything they could have imagined. In the clearing stood a triangular craft, metallic and smooth, with strange symbols etched into its surface. It emitted a faint hum, almost like it was alive. One of the soldiers, Jim Peniston, touched it and felt a jolt of energy coursing through his body. He later claimed the craft downloaded a sequence of binary code into his mind, a code that, when translated years later, contained mysterious coordinates and cryptic messages. Over the next few nights, more lights were seen darting through the forest. They moved with impossible speed, stopping and starting in ways no known aircraft could. The events were meticulously documented, but the military dismissed them as misidentified stars or a prank. But the soldiers knew what they saw. The forest, they said, was alive that night with something otherworldly. Even now, those who visit Rendlesham Forest report feeling an eerie presence, as if the visitors never truly left. Pascagoula's Midnight Visitors. It was a cool October night in 1973 when Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson decided to go fishing along the banks of the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. The moonlight danced on the water, and the quiet hum of the river was the only sound accompanying the men. But that calm was shattered when a strange metallic humming filled the air. They turned to see a glowing blue light hovering above the ground. Out of the light emerged three beings unlike anything they could have imagined. Their skin was rough and gray, almost like elephant hide. Their hands were claw-like and they had no eyes, just slits where a face should be. The creatures didn't walk. They floated toward the two men, as if carried by an unseen force. Before they could react, Parker and Hickson were paralyzed. Their bodies felt heavy, their limbs unresponsive. The beings carried them aboard the glowing craft, and what happened inside remains one of the most terrifying alien abduction accounts ever recorded. Both men later described a cold, sterile room and a blinding white light. Parker said a device, resembling a long metallic eye, scanned his body from head to toe, as if it were reading him. When they were released, they found themselves back on the riverbank, trembling and disoriented. It was as if no time had passed, but the experience felt burned into their minds. Parker was so traumatized he initially refused to talk about it, while Hickson immediately went to the police. When the officers left them alone in a room, a hidden recorder captured their panicked conversation. They weren't lying. They were terrified. Decades later, other witnesses came forward claiming they saw strange lights in the sky that night. But what were the beings? And why did they choose those two fishermen? The answers remain locked in the still waters of the Pascagoula River. The Valentich Disappearance. Frederick Valentich was just 20 years old, a young pilot with big dreams. On October 21, 1978, he took off from Moorabbin Airport in Australia, flying a Cessna 182L over the Bass Strait. The sun had set, and the twilight sky was painted in shades of deep blue and orange. It was supposed to be a routine flight. Instead, it became one of the most puzzling disappearances in aviation history. At 7:06 p.m., Valentich radioed air traffic control in Melbourne. His voice was calm but curious. "Is there any known traffic below 5,000 feet?" he asked. The controller responded that there was none. Then Valentich described seeing a large unknown aircraft with 4 bright lights moving erratically above him. "It's not an aircraft," he said, his voice growing tense. The object was metallic, he added, with a shiny surface reflecting the fading light of the evening. It seemed to play with him, darting above and around his plane in impossible maneuvers. The controller tried to keep him calm, asking more questions, but Valentich's responses became increasingly frantic. "It's hovering on top of me," he said, his voice trembling. Then came his final words, chilling in their simplicity. "It's not an aircraft." The transmission ended with a strange metallic scraping sound, and then silence. Valentich and his plane vanished without a trace. No wreckage was ever found, though several witnesses reported seeing green lights hovering over the Bass Strait that night. Was he abducted? Did he misidentify something? The mystery of Valentich's disappearance still haunts the skies above Australia. The Roswell Crash. The summer of 1947 brought an oppressive heat to the small town of Roswell, New Mexico. Farmers tended their fields, children played in the dusty streets, and the world felt as though it hadn't changed in decades. But one stormy night in July shattered that illusion forever. A rancher named Mac Brazel awoke to find strange debris scattered across his property, metallic fragments that were impossibly light yet indestructible. Some pieces seemed to have strange symbols etched into them, like hieroglyphs from an alien language. Brazel reported his findings to the local authorities, and soon the U.S. military arrived, sealing off the site and confiscating everything. The official story was that it was a weather balloon, part of a secret program. But locals whispered of something far stranger, of alien bodies recovered from the wreckage, small and gray, with elongated heads and large black eyes. Witnesses claimed to see military trucks hauling something away under heavy guard, and rumors of a cover-up spread like wildfire. Decades later, the Roswell incident remains the cornerstone of UFO lore. Was it truly an extraterrestrial crash? or a classified government project shrouded in secrecy? The desert winds of Roswell carry no answers, only whispers of what might have fallen from the sky that night. The Flatwoods Monster. The night of September 12, 1952, began innocently enough in the quiet, sleepy town of Flatwoods, West Virginia. Brothers Edward and Fred May were playing outside with their friend Tommy Heyer when they saw it, a fiery object streaking across the darkening sky. It moved so fast it almost seemed alive, like a glowing comet tearing toward the earth. Moments later, the boys watched it disappear behind a nearby hill, leaving behind a trail of smoke. Heart-pounding, they rushed to tell their mother, Kathleen May. She grabbed a flashlight and, joined by a few neighbors, they ventured toward the crash site. As they climbed the hill, the air grew thick and acrid, the unmistakable stench of sulfur burning their noses and throats. Strange, mechanical clicking noises filled the still night air, growing louder with every step they took. And then they saw it. Perched atop the hill was a creature unlike anything they'd ever imagined. It stood at least 10 feet tall, its body shrouded in a dark metallic-like casing shaped like a spade. Its eyes glowed red, staring down at them with an intensity that seemed to pierce their very souls. Its long, claw-like arms stretched outward, as though it was beckoning, or warning them to stay away. The group froze in terror, unable to look away from the creature as it emitted a hissing sound, almost like steam escaping from a boiling pot. Panic set in, and the group fled down the hill, stumbling over rocks and roots in their desperation to escape. When they finally reached the safety of their homes, their terror was palpable. Kathleen's hands trembled as she described the creature to reporters the next day, and one of the boys refused to sleep with the lights off for weeks. Skeptics dismissed the sighting as a misidentified owl or meteor, but the witnesses swore they knew what they saw. Years later, visitors to the area still claim to feel an unsettling presence in the woods, as though the Flatwoods Monster never left. The Allagash Waterway incident. The dense wilderness of northern Maine is vast and remote, a place where the night sky feels like a blanket of stars, and the silence is as deep as the forests. In the summer of 1976, 4 friends, Jim Weiner, Jack Weiner, Chuck Rack, and Charlie Foltz, set out on a canoeing trip along the Allagash Waterway, eager for adventure and a weekend of camaraderie. But they found more than they bargained for. It was their second night on the water when they first saw it, a bright, glowing orb hovering low above the treetops. At first, they thought it might be a helicopter or a plane, but it moved with an eerie fluidity, gliding silently across the sky. The men felt a mix of curiosity and dread, but brushed it off as a trick of the light or their imagination. 2 nights later, the friends built a campfire on the edge of the water and decided to paddle out onto the lake for some night fishing. The fire blazed brightly behind them, a comforting beacon in the darkness. But as they drifted in their canoe, the light returned, this time much closer. It hovered over the lake, pulsating like a heartbeat, its reflection dancing on the water's surface. One of the men signaled it with a flashlight, and the light responded, growing brighter and rushing toward them. That's when everything went black. The next thing they remembered, they were back at their campsite. The fire that had been roaring just moments earlier was now reduced to smoldering embers, even though they'd only been on the water for what felt like minutes. Time had slipped away, and none of them could explain how or why. Years later, under hypnosis, all 4 men recounted the same chilling memories, being taken aboard a craft surrounded by tall, gray-skinned beings with oversized, almond-shaped eyes. The creatures performed medical examinations, poking and prodding, as if the men were specimens in a lab. The vividness of their memories left them shaken, and their accounts were eerily consistent. To this day, the Allagash Waterway remains a hotspot for strange sightings, and the four friends' story is one of the most compelling cases of alien abduction ever recorded. Whatever happened to them on that lake, it changed their lives forever. The Travis Walton abduction. The forest was quiet that November evening in 1975, the kind of silence that sets in when nature rests, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the crisp Arizona wind. Travis Walton and his crew of loggers were wrapping up a long day's work near the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest. As they piled into their truck to head home, the setting sun cast an orange glow across the trees, but something far more brilliant soon outshone it. As they drove along the rugged forest road, a piercing light appeared through the trees ahead. At first, the men thought it might be the headlights of another vehicle, but as they drew closer, it became clear this was no ordinary light. It hung in the air, a golden disk radiating an otherworldly glow that bathed the forest in an unnatural, almost hypnotic light. Travis, curious and impulsive, jumped out of the truck to get a better look, ignoring his friend's panicked shouts to stay back. He approached the craft slowly, his heart pounding, the light illuminating his face. And then, without warning, a beam of light shot out from the disk, striking him in the chest and throwing him several feet into the air. His friends screamed in terror, convinced Travis was dead. They fled the scene, their truck barreling down the forest road as fast as it could go. But guilt weighed heavy on them, and they returned a short while later, only to find that Travis and the craft were gone. For 5 days Travis was missing. Search parties scoured the forest, but there was no trace of him. Then, on the 5th night, he reappeared, disoriented and terrified, at a gas station miles away. He claimed he had been aboard a spacecraft where strange, humanoid beings with large black eyes subjected him to medical examinations. He described their cold, expressionless faces and the sterile, metallic environment of the craft in vivid detail. Skeptics called it a hoax, but Travis and his crew maintained their story. Decades later, it remains one of the most famous alien abduction cases in history. Whatever happened in that forest, Travis Walton's life, and the lives of those who witnessed the event, would never be the same. We've walked through the fog of the unexplainable tonight, stories of blinding lights, strange beings, and whispered encounters that defy everything we know. These weren't just tales of terror, but reminders that the universe is vast, unpredictable, and perhaps not as empty as we'd like to believe. Some of these people never found answers. Some were left haunted by what they saw, heard, or felt, and some simply vanished, leaving nothing behind but their chilling accounts. Could their experiences be warnings, clues, or are they just fragments of something far greater than we can comprehend? We like to believe that we are in control, that the world is grounded in logic and reason. But stories like these remind us how fragile that control really is. If the veil between worlds is as thin as these encounters suggest, then perhaps it's only a matter of time before the unknown comes for us too. So the next time you look up at the night sky, remember, the stars may not be the only ones watching.